John had spent decades serving his community as a deputy sheriff, dedicating his life to keeping people safe. Now that he was retired, he wanted nothing more than to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, spending time with family, exploring new hobbies, and taking occasional road trips in his trusty RV. This wasn't just any ordinary RV. It was specially designed to serve as a mobile command center during emergencies. Inside, it was equipped with communication devices, medical supplies, maps, and even a small workspace where John could coordinate efforts if called upon by the local sheriff's department. When John first moved into his new home, nestled in a quiet gated neighborhood, he thought long and hard about whether this would be the right place for him. The houses were nice, the streets clean, and the neighbors seemed friendly enough, at least on the surface. He carefully reviewed the Homeowners Association, HOA, guidelines before signing the papers. While there were plenty of rules about landscaping, parking, and exterior paint colors, John figured he'd be fine. After all, the RV wouldn't cause any trouble parked neatly in his driveway. It wasn't blocking anyone's view or causing a disturbance. The RV itself was modest, not flashy or oversized like some of the luxury rigs you see on the highway. It blended in well with the other vehicles parked around the neighborhood. Most importantly, it held sentimental value for John. During his years as a deputy, it had been his companion through countless rescue missions, storm responses, and search operations. Even though he was retired now, he liked knowing the RV was ready to help out in case of an emergency. It gave him a sense of purpose, a connection to the career he loved so much. At first, everything seemed perfect. John settled into his routine. Mornings, sipping coffee on the porch, afternoons tinkering with the RV to keep it in top shape, and evenings watching the sunset from his backyard. His neighbors waved hello when they passed by, and life felt peaceful. But little did John know, trouble was brewing just beneath the surface. In every community, there's always someone who takes the rules a bit too seriously. And in this neighborhood, that person was Karen. Karen prided herself on being the unofficial rule enforcer of the HOA. She patrolled the streets in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, jotting down notes whenever she spotted something out of place. A mailbox painted the wrong shade. Noted. Grass growing half an inch taller than allowed. Documented. Cars parked in front of homes instead of garages. Photographed for evidence. To Karen, these infractions weren't minor annoyances. They were personal affronts to the order and beauty of the neighborhood. So when Karen drove past John's house one sunny afternoon and spotted the RV sitting quietly in his driveway, her eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. Her mind immediately went to the HOA rulebook, specifically the section prohibiting vehicles over 20 feet long from remaining visible on residential lots for more than 48 hours. Never mind that the RV wasn't bothering anyone, or that it looked perfectly normal parked there. All Karen saw was a violation waiting to happen. And once Karen set her sights on something, or someone, there was no stopping her. For John, unaware of the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, life continued as usual. He had no idea that his quiet retirement was about to take a dramatic turn thanks to Karen's unrelenting determination to enforce the rules. What started as a simple misunderstanding would soon spiral into a showdown between two very different personalities and leave the entire neighborhood talking. Karen was not the kind of person to let things slide, especially when it came to enforcing the HOA rules. She took her role as the neighborhood's unofficial watchdog very seriously, and she thrived on the power it gave her. To Karen, the rules weren't just guidelines. They were sacred laws that kept the community looking pristine and orderly. And in her mind, anyone who dared to break those rules was a threat to the harmony of the neighborhood. When she first noticed John's RV parked in his driveway, Karen felt a surge of indignation. It didn't matter that the vehicle was tucked neatly out of the way or that it blended in with the other cars on the street. All she could focus on was the fact that it was there at all. And worse, it had been there for more than 2 days. According to the HOA handbook, any vehicle over 20 feet long had to be stored out of sight after 48 hours. The RV, though modest in appearance, clearly exceeded that limit. Determined to take action, Karen marched over to John's house later that afternoon. She knocked sharply on the door, her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand. When John answered, he greeted her with a polite smile, unsure of what to expect. Karen wasted no time getting to the point. "Good afternoon," she began, her tone clipped and formal. "I'm here about your RV. I'm afraid it's in violation of the HOA parking regulations." John blinked, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation. He stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him so they wouldn't disturb his wife, who was inside reading. "Oh, I see," he said calmly, trying to diffuse the tension. "It's actually a mobile command center. It's part of my old job as a deputy sheriff. I keep it here because it's still useful in emergencies." But Karen wasn't interested in hearing explanations. She shook her head firmly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand you may have your reasons, but the rules are very clear. Vehicles like this can't remain visible on residential properties for more than 48 hours. If it's not moved by tomorrow evening, I'll have no choice but to report it to the HOA board." John sighed, sensing that reasoning with her wasn't going to work. Still, he tried again. "Look, this isn't just a recreational vehicle. It has important equipment inside, communication gear, medical supplies, things that could save lives if needed. Moving it won't be easy, and honestly, I don't think it's necessary." Karen crossed her arms, her expression growing even sterner. "I'm sorry, but exceptions can't be made. Everyone has to follow the same rules, regardless of their circumstances." With that, she turned on her heel and walked briskly back to her golf cart, leaving John standing on his porch feeling frustrated and confused. Over the next few days, Karen escalated her efforts. She sent John multiple emails, each one more aggressive than the last. The first message was polite enough, reminding him of the 48-hour rule and urging him to comply. But as the days passed and the RV remained in the driveway, her tone became increasingly hostile. By the third email, she was accusing John of deliberately ignoring the rules and threatening to involve the HOA board if he didn't remove the vehicle immediately. John read each message with mounting irritation. He couldn't believe how quickly Karen had turned a minor issue into a full-blown conflict. He replied to her emails patiently, explaining once again why the RV was important and assuring her that it posed no threat to the neighborhood. But Karen refused to listen. In her mind, John was simply making excuses to avoid following the rules. Her determination only grew stronger as time went on. One evening, while John was relaxing on his porch with a cup of tea, he spotted Karen driving slowly past his house in her golf cart. She slowed down to glare at the RV before speeding off, as if to remind him that she was watching. It was clear that she wasn't going to back down anytime soon. As the deadline approached, John found himself wondering how far Karen would actually go. Would she really call the HOA board? Or was this just bluster, an attempt to assert her authority without following through? Either way, he knew he couldn't ignore the situation forever. Something would have to give. And soon. The clock was ticking, and Karen wasn't about to let John off the hook. She had made up her mind. The RV had to go, no matter what excuses John came up with. To her, this wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about proving a point. If she allowed one person to bend the guidelines, it would set a dangerous precedent. The neighborhood's pristine image, which she worked so hard to maintain, would crumble under a wave of disobedience, and Karen couldn't let that happen. By Thursday morning, Karen had drafted yet another email to John. This time, her tone was icy and unyielding. "Dear Mr. John's last name," she wrote, skipping any pretense of politeness. "As you are well aware, your continued disregard for the HOA parking regulations is unacceptable. Unless the RV is removed from your driveway by noon on Friday, I will personally arrange for its removal through a towing company. Please understand that this action will be taken in accordance with HOA policies, and all associated costs will be your responsibility." She hit send with a satisfied smirk, confident that her message would finally get through to him. In her mind, John was either too stubborn or too lazy to comply, and now he'd have no choice but to act. But what Karen didn't realize was that her relentless campaign was only making John more determined to stand his ground. When John read the email later that day, he felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. He couldn't believe Karen was actually going to call a tow truck over something as trivial as an RV parked in his own driveway. It wasn't like the vehicle was causing any harm. It wasn't leaking oil, blocking traffic, or even drawing attention. Yet here she was, threatening to escalate the situation to ridiculous levels. Still, John knew better than to ignore her completely. He decided to try one last time to reason with her, hoping to appeal to whatever shred of common sense she might possess. He sent a reply explaining, again, the purpose of the RV. "Karen," he wrote, "this isn't just a recreational vehicle. It's a mobile command center equipped with emergency supplies and communication tools. Moving it could damage sensitive equipment inside. Surely there's room for compromise here." But Karen wasn't interested in compromises or listening. By now, she saw John's explanations as nothing more than attempts to sidestep the rules. Her response came within minutes, short and dismissive. "Rules are rules, Mr. Last Name. No exceptions can be made. Please ensure the RV is removed by the deadline." As Friday approached, Karen grew increasingly smug. She began making arrangements with a local towing company, providing them with photos of the RV and John's address. She imagined how satisfying it would feel to watch the massive vehicle being hauled away, knowing she had single-handedly restored order to the neighborhood. She even started rehearsing what she would say to John when the deed was done. Something firm but professional, of course. She wanted to appear authoritative without seeming petty. Meanwhile, John found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, he hated the idea of letting Karen win. Giving in would mean surrendering to her unreasonable demands, and it might encourage her to target other neighbors in the future. On the other hand, he didn't want to risk having the RV towed. Not only could the process potentially damage the equipment inside, but it would also disrupt his ability to assist in emergencies if needed. Frustrated and out of options, John decided to reach out to someone who might be able to help: Sheriff Miller. Though retired, John still maintained close ties with the local sheriff's department and occasionally volunteered during major operations. He explained the situation to Sheriff Miller, hoping for advice on how to handle Karen's threats. To John's surprise, Sheriff Miller didn't just offer words of encouragement. He offered to step in personally. "Don't worry about it, John," the sheriff said with a chuckle. "Let me deal with this. Sometimes people need a little reminder about what really matters." With that, plans were set in motion. Little did Karen know, her showdown with John was about to take a turn she never saw coming. As Friday morning dawned, Karen woke up feeling triumphant. Today was the day she'd finally put an end to the RV fiasco once and for all. She dressed in her sharpest outfit, grabbed her clipboard, and headed outside, ready to oversee the towing operation herself. What she didn't realize was that the real drama was just beginning, and it wouldn't unfold the way she expected. Friday morning arrived, and Karen was practically buzzing with excitement. She had spent the past few days imagining this moment: the RV being hauled away, John forced to admit defeat, and her authority reaffirmed in front of the entire neighborhood. It was going to be a victory not just for her, but for the HOA as a whole. As far as she was concerned, this was about more than an RV. It was about sending a message that no one could flout the rules without consequences. She pulled into John's driveway bright and early, accompanied by a tow truck driver she'd hired. The large flapped truck rumbled to a stop behind the RV, its engine growling ominously. Karen stepped out of her car, clipboard in hand, wearing her signature sunglasses and a smug smile. She glanced at the RV, then at her watch, as if everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. "All right," she said to the tow truck driver, gesturing toward the vehicle. "Let's get this taken care of." But before the driver could even climb out of his cab, two marked sheriff's cruisers rolled up the street, their lights flashing silently. Neighbors began peeking out of their windows, curious about what was happening. One cruiser parked behind the tow truck, while the other pulled alongside Karen's car, effectively boxing them in. Out of the first vehicle stepped Sheriff Miller himself, dressed in his full uniform, badge gleaming, hat firmly on his head, and boots polished to perfection. A deputy followed close behind him. Karen froze, her confident smirk faltering. She turned to face the sheriff, unsure why law enforcement was suddenly involved. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was there some kind of emergency? Had something gone wrong? Before she could say anything, Sheriff Miller approached her, his expression calm but authoritative. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat slightly. His voice was polite, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "I hear we've got a situation here." Karen cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. "Yes, Sheriff," she stammered, clutching her clipboard tightly. "This RV is in violation of our HOA parking regulations. I've been attempting to resolve the issue with the owner, but he hasn't complied. So I arranged for it to be towed." Sheriff Miller raised an eyebrow, glancing at the RV. Then he looked back at Karen, his tone softening but still firm. "Ma'am, do you know whose RV this is?" he asked. Karen hesitated, thrown off balance by the question. "Well, no, not specifically," she admitted. "But it belongs to the homeowner, obviously." The sheriff nodded slowly, then gestured toward the RV. "That's correct. It does belong to the homeowner. But what you may not realize is that this isn't just any RV. This is a mobile command center used by our department during emergencies. It's equipped with communication systems, medical supplies, and other critical tools we rely on when coordinating responses to disasters or manhunts." Karen blinked, her face paling as the weight of his words sank in. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. The tow truck driver shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing that things were about to get awkward. Sheriff Miller continued, his voice growing firmer. "Now imagine if this vehicle were towed because someone decided it didn't meet their personal standards. Imagine if we needed it during an emergency and found it sitting in an impound lot instead of where it's supposed to be. Do you see how that could create serious problems? Not just for us, but for the entire community." Karen swallowed hard, her earlier bravado crumbling under the sheriff's steady gaze. She glanced around nervously, noticing that several neighbors had gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold. Some were whispering to each other, while others simply stared in stunned silence. For the first time, Karen realized she might have overstepped. I didn't know," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. "If I had known it was so important." Sheriff Miller cut her off gently but firmly. "It's always best to ask questions before taking drastic actions, ma'am, especially when it involves something as vital as public safety. Now I suggest we all take a step back and rethink this situation." With that, the sheriff signaled to his deputy, who walked over to speak with the tow truck driver. Within moments, the driver was climbing back into his truck and driving away, leaving Karen standing alone in John's driveway. Her clipboard hung limply at her side, and her usual air of confidence was nowhere to be seen. As the sheriff turned to leave, he gave Karen one last look. "Have a good day, man," he said, tipping his hat again. Then he climbed into his cruiser and drove off, leaving behind. As the sheriff's cruisers pulled away and the tow truck disappeared down the street, Karen stood frozen in John's driveway, her face flushed with embarrassment. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered began to disperse, but not before exchanging knowing glances and quiet whispers. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others suppressed smirks, clearly amused by the spectacle they had just witnessed. For Karen, this was nothing short of a nightmare. What she had envisioned as a triumphant enforcement of HOA rules had turned into a public humiliation, and everyone seemed to know it. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had happened. By mid-morning, nearly every household had heard the story. how Karen had tried to tow an RV only to discover it was a critical piece of emergency equipment used by the sheriff's department. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. People who had previously tolerated, or even feared, Karen's constant nitpicking now saw her in a new light. Instead of being the authoritative enforcer of order, she appeared petty and overzealous, willing to put her own ego above the needs of the community. For Karen, the fallout was immediate and brutal. That afternoon, she ventured out to check her mailbox, avoiding eye contact with anyone she passed. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Neighbors who normally greeted her warmly now gave her curt nods or ignored her altogether. One woman even muttered under her breath, "Mobile command center." Really, as Karen walked by. Each interaction chipped away at her confidence, leaving her feeling isolated and humiliated. But the backlash didn't stop there. Someone in the neighborhood created a private Facebook group called Karen Watch, where residents could share updates and stories about her antics. Within hours, screenshots of her emails to John were posted anonymously, along with sarcastic commentary about her inability to recognize the bigger picture. Comments poured in from members of the group, many expressing frustration over past grievances. "Remember when she complained about my Christmas lights because they blinked too fast?" One neighbor wrote. Another chimed in. "She once sent me a letter because my mailbox leaned slightly to the left." The posts kept coming, painting a vivid picture of Karen's overbearing behavior. It became clear that she wasn't just disliked, she was resented. Her actions against John were simply the tipping point that exposed her true nature to the entire community. To make matters worse, the HOA board caught wind of the incident and decided to hold an emergency meeting. They weren't pleased about Karen taking matters into her own hands without consulting them first. When she arrived at the meeting later that week, she expected support, or at least understanding. But instead, she faced a barrage of criticism. Board members accused her of acting recklessly and potentially putting the association at legal risk. After all, interfering with emergency equipment could have serious consequences, and the last thing the HOA needed was a lawsuit. By the end of the meeting, Karen was reprimanded and stripped of her unofficial role as the neighborhood's rule enforcer. From now on, any complaints would need to go directly to the board for review. As she left the meeting, head bowed and cheeks burning, she realized she had lost far more than just this battle. She had lost her influence, her reputation, and perhaps most painfully, her sense of belonging in the community. Back at home, Karen sat alone in her living room, staring blankly at the wall. For the first time, she allowed herself to reflect on her actions, not just regarding John's RV, but everything else she had done in the name of enforcing the rules. She thought about the countless hours she'd spent patrolling the streets, documenting minor infractions, and confronting neighbors over trivial issues. Had it all been worth it? And why did no one seem to appreciate her efforts anymore? Karen didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt like judgment. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but deep down, she wondered if there was a way to rebuild the bridges she had burned. For now, though, she resolved to lay low, to avoid drawing attention to herself, and hope that, eventually, the neighborhood might forget about the whole ordeal. Meanwhile, life returned to normal for everyone else. The RV remained safely parked in John's driveway, untouched and unbothered. Neighbors went back to their routines, chatting over fences and waving hello as they passed each other on the street. The drama had united them in a strange way, reminding them of the importance of balance between rules and compassion. And as for Karen, she became a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes enforcing the rules isn't as important as understanding the people behind them. In the weeks that followed, Karen's life in the neighborhood became a shadow of what it once was. Gone were the days when she confidently patrolled the streets in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, ready to document every minor infraction. Now, she avoided leaving her house unless absolutely necessary, dreading the sideways glances and whispered comments from neighbors who had once tolerated, or at least ignored, her antics. The Facebook group Karen Watch remained active, with new posts popping up regularly about her past grievances. Someone even shared a meme featuring a cartoon bulldog holding a clipboard with the caption, "When you take HOA rules *2* seriously." It didn't take long for everyone to figure out it was about Karen. Her isolation grew worse as people began to distance themselves socially. At the monthly block party, a casual gathering where neighbors brought food and caught up on each other's lives, Karen found herself sitting alone at a table near the edge of the yard. No one approached her, and when she tried to strike up conversations, responses were polite but distant. She watched as others laughed and chatted, feeling like an outsider in a community she had once dominated. Even her attempts to bake cookies or bring snacks to share were met with lukewarm gratitude, further highlighting how much things had changed. The HOA board also kept a close eye on her, ensuring she adhered to their directive to stop enforcing rules independently. Anytime she raised concerns during meetings, they dismissed them quickly, reminding her that all complaints needed to go through proper channels. This left Karen feeling powerless, her role as the self-appointed enforcer completely dismantled. For someone who thrived on control and order, this loss of purpose hit hard. She spent hours pacing her living room, replaying the events in her mind and wondering where it all went wrong. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood seemed lighter, freer, almost relieved. Without Karen breathing down their necks, residents relaxed a little more. Grass that might have been half an inch too long stayed untrimmed without consequence. Mailboxes leaned slightly crooked, and no one batted an eye. Conversations among neighbors turned playful, with jokes about accidentally parking oversized vehicles just to see if Karen would notice. In a way, her downfall had given everyone permission to breathe easier, to focus less on perfection, and more on enjoying their homes and relationships. John, on the other hand, became something of a local hero. Neighbors stopped by his driveway to admire the RV, asking questions about its features and marveling at its importance during emergencies. He happily obliged, sharing stories about his years as a deputy sheriff and explaining how the mobile command center worked. His calm demeanor and willingness to listen stood in stark contrast to Karen's rigid enforcement style, earning him respect and admiration. People started referring to him as the guy who outsmarted Karen, though John himself never gloated or sought attention. To him, it wasn't about winning. It was about standing up for what mattered. One evening, as John sat on his porch sipping coffee, he noticed Karen walking her dog down the street. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone, but John could tell she looked tired, defeated, even. He felt a pang of sympathy. While he hadn't enjoyed the conflict, he couldn't help but feel sorry for her now. After all, she wasn't a bad person. She was simply misguided, consumed by her need for control. Maybe, he thought, there was still hope for her to find her place in the community again, if she was willing to change. As the sun set over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, it was clear that life had shifted for everyone involved. The drama had brought both tension and unity, exposing cracks in relationships while strengthening others. For Karen, it was a lesson in humility and perspective. For her neighbors, it was a reminder of the value of kindness and understanding. And for John, it reinforced the importance of staying true to oneself, even when faced with unnecessary challenges. Though the immediate drama had subsided, its effects lingered, shaping the neighborhood in subtle yet meaningful ways. What had started as a dispute over an RV had evolved into something bigger, a reflection of how people choose to live together, navigate differences, and ultimately decide what kind of community they want to create. Months passed, and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The drama surrounding Karen and John's RV had faded from daily conversations, but its impact lingered in subtle ways. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now made an effort to connect, sharing gardening tips, organizing potluck dinners, or simply waving hello as they passed each other on the street. The incident with Karen had inadvertently brought them closer, reminding everyone that rules were important, but so was compassion. It wasn't about perfection, it was about creating a place where people felt valued and respected. For Karen, life remained quiet and solitary. She spent most of her time indoors, avoiding interactions with neighbors whenever possible. When she did venture outside, she kept her head down and moved quickly, hoping not to draw attention. Her golf cart sat unused in the garage, collecting dust, while her clipboard gathered cobwebs in a drawer. Though she still cared deeply about the neighborhood's appearance and order, she no longer felt compelled to enforce the rules herself. Instead, she focused on small acts of kindness, watering plants for elderly neighbors when they were out of town, leaving anonymous thank you notes for mail carriers, or donating books to the community library. These gestures were minor, but they signaled a shift in her perspective. Slowly, she began to rebuild trust, one tiny step at a time. One day, Karen mustered the courage to knock on John's door. She hesitated before ringing the bell, rehearsing what she wanted to say in her mind. When John answered, he greeted her with a polite smile, though surprise flickered across his face. "Hi, Karen," he said cautiously. "What can I do for you?" Karen took a deep breath, clutching a small envelope in her hands. "John, I just wanted to apologize," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I realize now that I went too far with the RV situation. I didn't understand how important it was, or how my actions could affect others. I'm sorry if I caused any trouble." John studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Karen," he replied. "Apologies mean a lot, especially when they're sincere. We all make mistakes. It's part of being human." Encouraged by his response, Karen handed him the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note expressing her regret, along with a gift card to a local coffee shop. "I hope this makes up for some of the stress I caused," she added quietly. John accepted the gesture graciously, thanking her before inviting her to sit for a few minutes. They chatted briefly about neutral topics, the weather, upcoming holidays, and plans for the neighborhood park renovation. Though their conversation was brief, it marked the beginning of a fragile truce. For the first time in months, Karen left someone's house feeling hopeful rather than humiliated. As weeks turned into months, Karen continued making amends. She attended HOA meetings, listening more than speaking, and offered constructive input instead of harsh criticism. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. One neighbor even invited her to join a book club, which gave her a chance to bond with others over shared interests. Slowly but surely, Karen found her footing again, not as the enforcer, but as a quieter, kinder presence in the community. John, meanwhile, enjoyed the peace and camaraderie that came with his newfound popularity. His RV remained parked in the driveway, untouched and respected by everyone. Occasionally, he'd open it up during block parties, letting curious kids climb inside and pretend to be emergency responders. He also volunteered his time to teach safety workshops at the local community center, sharing his knowledge and experience with younger generations. The neighborhood itself seemed transformed. People laughed more, argued less, and worked together to solve problems. When a storm knocked down trees and power lines, residents banded together to clean up debris and check on vulnerable neighbors. Even Karen joined in, rolling up her sleeves to help clear branches from sidewalks. It was a far cry from the tense, rule-obsessed environment she had once tried to maintain, and everyone agreed it was better this way. In the end, the RV incident taught everyone valuable lessons. For Karen, it was a reminder that rigid adherence to rules could alienate others, and that flexibility and empathy often mattered more. For John, it reinforced the importance of standing firm yet remaining patient, even in the face of conflict. And for the neighborhood as a whole, it highlighted the power of unity and understanding in building a true sense of community. Life moved forward, calmer and brighter than before. The RV stayed right where it